Hello and welcome to Coffee Time with Abcadeas. I am your host, Abcadeas, and this is the show where you just might see me take a sip of this coffee, and more or less I just rant about anything and everything that interests me. I'm actually probably going to be a bit more likely to be drinking out of this coffee because I'm making this video not too long after waking up, as I have a few things to do today, but there's definitely a topic I'd like to dive into. Today's kind of overarching theme, I guess, is this interesting trend, at least that I've seen in Canada, and I'm sure is very prevalent in America as well. But it's this very misinformed, one-sided kind of conservative conspiracy. I don't want to call it a group, but a trend, I guess. I should start off by saying I don't support any type of bourgeois liberal politicians. I don't support conservatives. I don't support liberals. I don't support NDP. If you put a gun to my head, I might vote for the NDP, but that would still be a tough choice for me to make. But with that being said, since I was a kid, I've noticed that particularly conservatives or people that are a little more right leaning have this trend. Not all of them, of course. The more educated amongst them do make very directed and poignant criticisms of liberal NDP politicians, but I've seen more often than not, especially in terms of the rhetoric that comes out of conservative leaning media, basically anything owned by Post Media, but they're mad at the right people, don't get me wrong, but they're mad about the wrong things. And I don't think there's anything that exemplifies this better than this ongoing issue in the city of Edmonton, Alberta. Um, Mayor Amberjeet Sohi, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I'm probably messing that up a little bit. Um, but he's had this idea and he's moving forward with plans to make Edmonton a 15-minute city. And depending on who you ask, this is a really positive thing that could change a lot of people's lives. It could bring them a lot more access to things like healthcare, more affordable groceries and food. And on the other hand, in the other narrative, in the other camp, you'll see people that believe this is the start of a East Berlin, West Berlin style city lockdown. You need passports to travel amongst different parts of the city. And I just want to get into this a bit. And I think it's a very interesting, almost case study of this kind of conspiratorial attitude where these people are looking for things that are wrong, but they're always looking for them in the wrong places. But anyways, let's start off by getting it from the horse's mouth, right? Amberjeet Sohi's website, his actual plan. So basically, 15-minute city is about quality of life, shortening commutes to work and amenities like groceries, recreation, restaurants, supporting a greater variety of local small businesses serving their own neighborhoods through community hubs, revitalizing strip malls, and supporting small-scale development, and reducing our environmental footprint by making it easier to drive less. So this is the thing that is setting off alarm bells for conservatives. Just to give us an idea of how to visualize this a bit better, this is more or less the plan that they've kind of drawn up, and they may be moving forward with. I believe we have to wait till spring 2023, so I'm sure in the next few months we'll hear or we'll see a more defined actual plan. But I'm sure for the people that live outside of Edmonton, you don't have any context for this whatsoever. But these are basically split up in such a way that about no matter where you are in that little district, it'll take you 15 minutes to get to any other point in that district. And the plan is you will have all the necessary amenities like an electronics store, a grocery store, cell phone proprietors, all these different businesses, services. You'll have a registry, making it so that you don't have to drive across town as often. And the way conservatives are spinning this is obviously this is going to turn into banning you from traveling in any other part of the city. You're going to be stuck in that specific area. Like you look at I know there's a few groups that are protesting, but this is just the first one I found. Yeg United. I'm not sure if this is a picture. Okay, this is picture from the protest. It was never about health, but tyrannical control. So this isn't even going on about their big sign isn't even talking about Amberjeet Sohis plan or anything, but I don't know if that was an unrelated protest or not. I actually can't see organized protest on Friday in White Ave, so it doesn't say that this photo is from that protest or isn't. That might just be kind of like a file photo for the person that they're kind of quoting in this article. And she goes on to quite the extent here, but our mayor, Amberjeet Sohi, would like Edmonton to become a 15-minute city, which will be limiting our movement between districts, as they call it. They want us to spend 90% of our life in this 15-minute area so they can monitor our carbon footprint, also known as our actual footprint. And okay, so this is a university student for one, but I don't know who needs to hear this explanation. But your carbon footprint is quite different than your literal footprint. I mean, your digital footprint could be compared to your actual footprint. I mean, in this sense, I'm sure she's relating to the idea of your movements, your overall patterns, being able to track you in the sense of your footprint. That's a lot easier to do with the $1,000 device that you volunteer to go get and put in your pocket and you signed into on all your accounts and enabled the GPS. Like, it's a lot easier to track you with that. Your carbon footprint is just a rough calculation of, hey, you drive this kind of car and you drove this far this year and this is the kind of eating habits you have, so this is the amount of food waste you produce, etc., 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 and then making a rough calculation. I don't know of any carbon footprint calculation that could be held up as exact science, especially not to the degree that it could be used to monitor you. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure if the Amberjeet Sohi government wanted to monitor and track your every movement because you're a dissident against the government, which is interesting because not just 20 minutes before this I was called a seditious traitor by one of these very same types of people for disagreeing with the government. So I'm only allowed to disagree with the government if I'm agreeing with you, right? I personally support all dissent, and I do support this dissent to a degree, but I just feel like these efforts would be a lot better directed in the right place. So, I mean, I could go on about this whole idea of 15-minute cities forever. I personally think it's a great idea. I stopped driving because the people in this city don't know how to drive. I know that sounds like a really generic statement, but as a little anecdote, I worked a bit of a sales job for a short period, and I had the sales leader come up from another part of the province, and that person had driven all across the province in all different parts, and the 2 days they spent in this city, they just absolutely lost their mind. Confirmed for me that at least in terms of this province, the worst drivers are in this city. So, because of that, and because I live with my girlfriend who has a vehicle, and I work from home, I don't see the math of needing my own vehicle or even wanting to drive. Most of the things I actually want and need are within a 15-minute walk of me, which is very nice and very convenient, and I like it very much. But I understand, and I've lived in different parts of this city where that's not possible, where it's a 25, 35, 40-minute drive, just, or 40-minute walk, sorry, just to get somewhere to get a jug of milk. And I don't I don't believe in the idea that, well, things are okay for me, so I'm not going to complain about that thing. It is a problem, right? It's not one of the most pressing problems, but in terms of what a municipal government is responsible for, city planning being one of the top items on the list, I think this is a positive thing they can do. I don't even see how it can be a negative thing. There's guaranteed charter rights, freedom of movement. There would be several challenges from the Supreme Court of Canada if they tried to implement even the slightest bit of restricting your movement in a city. Like, I don't understand. And like, you can just move, right? You tell people that complain about the system we're under, and you're like, well, you don't like it, then leave. Go live in Venezuela. Well, you go live in I don't know, some capitalist utopia like Cambodia or something. Like, I don't know, like the Congo, right? You know what I mean? Pick a capitalist country right now that's not almost on its knees in terms of its economy, but that's a separate conversation. But still, you could move to another city in Canada. That's a fundamental right you have in the charter, is to freely move and live in any province or territory in the country. So if one city implements this, a bunch of people leave, they're going to put two and two together. If they're going to restrict movement in a city, people are going to move out of that city, and then they have no people in the city. It's a logical kind of calculation. I don't even understand. Like, I don't think these people, types of activists, I guess we could call them, I don't think they think through their logic to any degree. I think as soon as they run up against a contrary narrative to what's already ingrained in them, they either shut it out or they just ignore it entirely. And again, it causes them to completely ignore, completely glance over the actual issues. So happening in the same province, right? In our province, the premier here, I'm just going to make sure the audio actually plays through. I apologize first off that this is a TikTok video. I have scoured Google and YouTube for the actual legitimate copy of this video, and I don't know if it was taken down or it's just extremely hard to find, but this is a statement from our premier. It might make me explode, but we're gonna go into it anyways. Sound is on. Is it though? Is sound on? Oh, I know. I think I have the website muted. Do unmute site. There we go.
Freely contributing.
There we go. Okay.
I came to Ottawa to advocate for Albertans, to ensure our province can continue freely contributing to what makes our country so strong. As I walk the streets of our nation's capital, I can't help but be reminded of the history of this place, including how Canada was founded. Many years ago, the Indigenous people of this land and those that came from across the world united to tame an unforgiving frontier, ensuring prosperity for countless future generations. It was their duty to support one another as neighbors and to build this country together, developing democratic institutions that would yield good and stable governance.
Okay. Where to even start on that? I am flabbergasted personally that there is an adult human that believes any of what she just said. The Indigenous and the Europeans came together to build democratic institutions. Democratic institutions that Indigenous people weren't even allowed to vote in for decades. Like, let's find this out. Indigenous get the right to vote in Canada. It's almost like it knew. 50 years ago, as of 2010. So 60 years ago. 65. We'll be generous, right? We'll if you want the reference, I'll make sure to add this in the description so you could go read specifically what this says. But right here, 50 years ago, the Canadian government granted First Nations people the right to vote. So how did they help build those democratic institutions if they weren't even allowed to vote in them for almost a century? Huh? How does that work? Can anybody do that math for me? Can someone put that together for me? And then that's not even acknowledging residential schools, Starlight Tours, smallpox blankets. Like, if you aren't aware of the history of Indigenous people in Canada, obviously I'm just a random white guy ranting about it, but let's give you just a couple bullet points, and I'm probably still gonna miss a lot of the fucked up shit they did. So residential schools, they stole all their children, banned them from speaking their language, practicing their spirituality in any way, beat, raped, and tortured these children, and murdered several of them, and we are now finding mass graves all over the country. And the kicker of these is they were open up until 1996. That was the year I was born. I've only been on this earth as long as residential schools have been closed. And those people helped build the country hand in hand, working together with their neighbors. Okay. How about the smallpox blankets? So after we tried to eliminate the Indigenous people, and as we continued to try to assimilate them, almost moving on to assimilation, I guess this is probably almost before the point of residential schools, but we decided to take the very deadly disease known as smallpox that I'm not 100% sure of the history of that disease, but I don't believe it was very prevalent or even known to the Indigenous populations. And what the Europeans did is they took people that were sick with smallpox, gave them these blankets, let them sleep in the blanket, told them to cough into the blanket, all this good stuff. And then they gave those blankets to the Indigenous people and killed them en masse through literally biological warfare. And that was on top of not only slaughtering Indigenous people en masse, but pitting them against each other. The antique version, if you will, of a proxy war. Two European powers taking two separate Indigenous tribes or two groups of tribes and getting them to do the fighting for them. And then the Starlight Tours. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. None of this is funny. What is funny to me is that there is an adult person that doesn't know any of this and can legitimately make any of those statements. And it's not even funny to me. It is so insane that I have no choice but to laugh, because it is blowing my mind, and I would probably be doing a Kyle with the drywall right now, holes in the drywall, if I was legitimately expressing my feelings about this. And I haven't even gotten into the things that actually piss me off about this person. We're just like 30 seconds into a political ad, and I'm going to post the link to the political ad down there. So if you want to read through the rest of it, it's just some bull crap about standing up for Alberta and building Canada better, whatever. I don't care about the nonsense she has to say. I only care about the policies politicians put forward. I don't care to listen to Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre or Daniel Smith. I don't care what they have to say, because what they have to say is absolutely meaningless. Other than shit like this. Starlight Tours, I don't think I completely explained those. The RCMP kidnapped Indigenous people during, I believe, started maybe the 50s, 60s, 70s, and brought them outside of city limits, outside of the limits of the reserve, and just dropped them off. Let them go. Usually in freezing cold winter. There's a lot more fucked up shit we've done to the Indigenous population, and I'm really only hitting the bullet points of the stuff that I went over. But for a human to be able to make the statement that was working together with them. I mean, yeah, we worked together really great. The Indigenous and the Europeans. The Indigenous got genocided, and the Europeans got all their shit. That was great. That was great teamwork. I don't understand. I mean, I think I've done just enough ranting on about that. Okay, I don't usually do edits in these videos, but I realized I left out kind of a glaring part of the issue with this particular statement video from Danielle Smith. And that is the overall effect of erasing the genocide of the Indigenous population in Canada. So, what happens as a result of that is you get people that are her age that are under the impression that the Indigenous people and the struggles they face are entirely their problem because they built these democratic institutions with us. They built this country with us. They were here this whole time. It's their fault that their reservations don't have running water. It's their fault that they have an increased rate of alcoholism that has nothing to do with the Europeans forcing alcohol onto them for several decades. And by forcing, they didn't hold it up to their throat and make them drink it, but it was one of the few things that they gave Native Americans in trade and sometimes for land. But the effect of this is you get people in that age group, the 40, 50, 60 years old, where they have kids going to school, and their kid comes home and they're like, Mom, Dad, did you know about all the messed up stuff we did to Indigenous people? And then their mom and their dad are like, oh no, the school is brainwashing you. They're trying to insert critical race theory into your head. They want you to hate being white and hate white people. Like, it makes it so that just an honest teaching of our history turns into a political issue. When I was a kid, when I was in the 8th grade, I was taught about several of these horrors. There wasn't any underlying liberal political agenda to brainwash us against being white. Woo! That wasn't a thing back then. It's not a thing now. Sure, I'm sure there's one or two teachers that take it too far, but the general idea of learning your history, especially within the racial context that it existed in, is very important. Because the whole reason we did all this shit to Indigenous Canadians wasn't just a matter of imperialism. It wasn't just a matter of colonialism. Yes, that was one of the biggest factors there. But it wasn't just, oh, these people are on land and resources that we want. We need to get rid of them so we can take them. Really, on top of that, they had this concept known as the white man's burden, that it was our responsibility to take these unruly savages and bring them into modern society. So that's why you see those assimilation efforts and things like residential schools that ended up being absolutely horrific. And Canadians will walk around and try to erase this shit. And I've heard more than once in my life that happened so long ago. Why are they complaining about it? This is a really interesting anecdote, kind of from my dad, actually. He was a great dad, wasn't perfect, but he always kind of relayed this idea that he is only trying to be better than his father, and that my responsibility is that I need to be better than my father. I'm never going to have children, so that's irrelevant in this conversation, but the basic idea being that you should have this sense of generational evolution, if you will, that as your family goes on, as the years go by, things should get better and not worse. So when you look at an entire population, entire race that has been forced into extremely traumatic situations up until the late 90s, and since then as well, there's been several things that are very suspicious and some trends that are very suspicious, like missing and murdered Indigenous women. But I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of a lot of these topics that I feel like I'm not the best person to speak on. My point is do you really think with this ongoing generational trauma with every generation, and that trauma only getting worse and worse and worse, starting off as just introducing alcohol and then having you murder your fellow Indigenous and then infecting you with smallpox and then abducting your children and brainwashing them, essentially, like, you realize that effect trickles down, and then the people that survive that aren't the most mentally stable people. and then they will go on to raise children that will not be the most mentally stable people. So it's an endless effect and cycle, and of course people break out of it, and of course the exceptional are able to rise above it. But at the end of the day, this has an everlasting effect that we need to address in some way, shape, or form. And the way to address it is definitely not by completely fucking ignoring it. Because you look at the comments under this TikTok, and this is the reason I wanted to film this clip again and put it in here, because I really wanted to go over these comments and I forgot to. But people are so supportive. The reason why I will one day move to Alberta. Thank you for being a great leader. Very well spoken. I'm a fan. Why aren't you running for Prime Minister? Alberta needs to share your common sense. Your common sense with the rest of Canada. I would vote for you in a heartbeat. Yes, the common sense that you probably read out of your 1960s textbook that was written in a time when Indigenous people still weren't allowed to vote and were barely getting rights, that said we showed up and shook hands and we were all friends and we all had a nice time and we worked together to survive the wilderness. Like, I don't know how anybody that understands any bit of Canadian history can watch the first 30 seconds of that video and not be completely fucking appalled, but go on to say that this is a great leader and someone that should be leading our fucking province. It is proof that the white supremacy that founded this country, that started off this country, that enabled the white man's burden rhetoric, and that caused all this grotesque suffering amongst an entire race of people, that is still very much here, and people don't want to acknowledge it. They just want to scream up in the air, oh, you call anybody you don't like a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm not saying that's a very specific ideology with a very specific set of beliefs. But Canadians, especially conservative leading Canadians, and especially the boomer generation Canadians, have a completely misconstrued version of Canadian history, and it has led them to think that, whether they admit it or not, white people are just superior, that they've made better decisions, that they work harder, so that's why we're more successful. It's not because the entire country was literally built to cater to us in the imperial core. That's a whole nother conversation. But I think we can get back to the video now. So what actually pisses me off about Danielle Smith is she gives this impression she's fighting for Albertans. She's on our side. She's perhaps on the side of the working class. But the thing is about Alberta is we are big, heavy cucked by every single corporation that has ever done business here. Most of which are foreign-owned entities, by the way, but whatever corporations want in terms of lower tax rates or lesser environmental restrictions, not only does our media support whatever they ask for, but en masse, the conservative population of Canadians will support these same things. I personally think environmental regulations can be done well. I think in a lot of cases they aren't done well. When you have things like an arbitrary carbon tax and arbitrary carbon limits, it's ultimately ineffectual. I think if a responsible government that was truly elected by the people, or perhaps even somehow controlled by the people themselves, perhaps through some magical technology that could connect us all instantly, where we can share our opinions, thoughts, and feelings, and where we could easily click a button to vote on things. I hope someone invents such a technology soon. Anyways, a government like that, I believe, could do a lot of good in terms of directly harnessing the productive capacity of corporations and gradually shifting, gradually developing into responsible technologies that aren't going to mine out half of the Earth's core just to require them to function. Where we can legitimately look at investing in things like water-powered engines that have existed for about 5 decades now. Like, we could legitimately make these decisions because they don't have to be motivated by profit. They could be motivated by what is best for the people, when the people are making all the decisions. So, with that being said, when a government isn't in any way held accountable. Not even possible to be held accountable by its citizens, other than those citizens showing up every 4 years and checking off a box. And if you've watched my videos this far, you already know how I feel about that. But when you have a government that is basically given carte blanche over policy and allowed to do whatever they want, you get really bad environmental regulations, but at the same time, you get politicians just handing out money to corporations. And what is absolutely great about this is this has been a long time ongoing issue in Canada. And I realize now I should have reached out to a friend of mine who is a rural Canadian on this issue in particular, but this money is essentially being given to oil corporations to clean up the oil wells that they made agreements with rural farmers to put on their land and to clean up eventually and to give farmers a certain cut of the profits. And more or less, my understanding is during the 2014 oil bust that happened globally, by the way, a lot of these wells either became unprofitable or the oil companies wanted to cut corners and reduce costs, so they either shut down these wells or stopped paying the farmers or abandoned them and refused to clean them up. I may be getting one or two things wrong there, but moral of the story is the oil companies have a legal obligation to clean up the oil wells, and they haven't for several years now. So our premier solution is to hand them a big bucket of money to ask them to do what they're legally obligated to do. Does that sound like a premier who's on our side, who's using the mechanisms of power that are available to her to stand up for the working class and for urban and rural Canadians alike? I don't know about that. I really don't know about that. And what really scares me is I've already kind of talked about her in my healthcare video, but she is so dull, so uninformed, misinformed. I don't even know if she believes half the shit she's saying or if she's just saying it to try and support her policy positions. But this is one thing that happened in July that really piqued some people's interest. At least people on the left, I guess. People on the right perhaps agree with this fucking nonsense. And I say that to be very aggressive about this because my mother died of stage 4 melanoma. So I have a very personal connection to this issue. But yes, during a UCP leadership debate, while the UCP was deciding on their next leader, and after this debate, they decided on her, by the way, she's talking about cancer. And again, I will link this down below if you want to dive in deeper, but I think this one little sentence will get across what I need to get across. But when you think everything that built up before you got to stage 4 and that diagnosis, that's completely within your control, and there's something you can do about that that is different. So it's your fault if you die of cancer. You decided, you made the choice to get that cancer. You made the choice not to fight hard enough against that cancer. And that means, this is the argument that she's furthering, that means that if you get cancer, you shouldn't be the responsibility of the healthcare system. That's your choice. You fucked up. That's your responsibility. And don't get me wrong, I am more than aware of preventable kinds of cancer. By using my mom as a case study, she smoked like a chimney, drank like a sieve, did drugs at various points in her life, and she died of skin cancer, melanoma, from sun tanning. Sun tanning some 40 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. I'm sure there were a couple medical journals at the time, perhaps trying to make a link between sun tanning and cancer, but it's not like there was wide available knowledge that excessive exposure to the sun causes skin cancer. So how exactly was she to avoid that? She was supposed to predict the future of medical science? When you yourself, Mrs. Danielle Smith, the absolute fucking moron that is running our province, doesn't even know the basic history of Canada? You're telling me that my mom should have been able to understand and foresee medical science and not gone tanning on the beach. Okay. So that means when other people get cancer, what, they're just going to be left on their own? Or, oh, no, 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 no. Because she's on our side, right? I forgot that. So she wants to make it like America. When you get cancer, you're not only worried about fighting the cancer, but you're now making the decision, do I sell my house? Do I sell my car? Do I take out a loan? Do I just go bankrupt? Do I just not fight the cancer so I don't have to ruin my family's entire financial well-being? Because that is a great decision, and that is a decision Canadians should have to make. And specifically, that Albertans should have to make, because Albertans choose to get cancer. You see how that might be a bit more impactful than having a grocery store and a doctor's clinic within a 15-minute walk of your house. You see how that's maybe a bit more of an important issue. That when your parents get cancer, now you have to look at taking out loans or lending your parents money on top of them going bankrupt and taking out a bunch of loans for expensive cancer treatment. Don't get me wrong, I don't think there's going to be a flip switched overnight. A switch flipped overnight. I said that a little backwards. I don't think it's going to happen overnight where it's like, oh, free healthcare, $1 million for cancer treatment. It's going to be gradual, right? Oh, you pay for 5%. You pay for 10%. You pay for 15%. You pay for 20%. Guess what? Public healthcare isn't sustainable anymore. You pay for 75%. Now you pay for 100%. And that treatment started off as $20,000. And then the next year it went up to $30,000. And 10 years later, that treatment is $250,000. And then the 10 years down the road, each day of treatment is $200,000. Like, this is what medical companies do because they have a monopoly on your life. The only way you get to survive this is if you paid this money. You don't get the choice of going to another experimental treatment or another chemotherapy treatment. Like, you get the hospital that you live near, and that's it. Maybe if you're rich, you get to travel to America, or you get to do yada yada yada. And if you want to advocate for private healthcare, maybe that's what you support. You want this idea. I want to be able to live in Vancouver and fly to Toronto for my cancer treatments because Toronto's hospital is different and better. And the chemotherapy there is different and better. Sure, okay. Like, I don't see how that is worth risking bankruptcy and financial ruin to get your cancer treated. Like, I don't understand the trade-off. I don't understand how these people, if they aren't literally just paid goons of the UCP, how these people actually go out on the street and protest 15-minute cities while they're watching this person that is running our province basically fuck us over entirely, but do it under the guise of, no, I'm in it for Alberta. I support Alberta. I'm gonna stand up against Bill C-21 and the firearms legislation. I'm preparing a video on that, by the way, and I am pro-gun, so I'm against that legislation. But nonetheless, the amendments were actually repealed, and the few things that are left in the bill, to my understanding, aren't going to be as impactful as they otherwise would have been. But at the end of the day, it was a very easy thing for her to do in terms of rhetoric, as nothing was actually enforced, and now the law has been repealed anyways, so not the law, but the amendments, so the main part that she was really challenging, that she was really standing up to, is no longer there, so she's not going to really have to face a federal versus provincial legal challenge over it. She gets the clout of saying, I stood up for Alberta and I did this for Alberta, while she's handing out money to oil corporations and trying to sell out our public health care to the highest bidder. But if you want any more information on that, by the way, feel free to go back to my last video about Canadian healthcare. I have a couple specific links in there about a few of the things that Mrs. Smith is proposing and responsible for, but other than that, I think I have gone on more than enough of a rant today. A bit more of an angry one than usual, but I think it was very important. Thank you for watching. Thank you for everybody that continues to watch. It looks like it's about a dozen of you that I spam out the videos to, and sometimes you're interested in them. So I appreciate it nonetheless. Any feedback, of course, I welcome. I enjoy engaging about any topic in any way with anybody. So don't hesitate to leave a crazy, wild, long comment, because most likely I'll even make a video responding to them. I'm considering maybe collecting a couple comments and dedicating a certain day of the week, maybe a Sunday, to responding to them. I can say I already have a few in the chamber if I wanted to do that, so maybe that will be tomorrow's video, but I think that is it for me. Thank you for watching, and you have yourself a gooder.